Today I want to share with you a healthy molasses cookies recipe. These are soft and chewy and, most important, delicious. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, the nice thing about molasses cookies is that they lend themselves beautifully to being made with whole grain flours as opposed to all-purpose flour. So for this recipe today, I'm going to use whole wheat flour because that's easy to find at most local grocery stores. But if you've already started incorporating some of the ancient grain flours into your traditional foods kitchen, like einkorn flour or like spelt flour, you can definitely use those in this recipe. And if you've started incorporating sprouted flours into your baking, you can definitely use sprouted flour here. And if you want to learn how to make homemade sprouted flour, I have a video where I show you how to do that, and I'll be sure to link to that in the description below. Now, you don't need to write any of this down. If you open the description under this video, I'll have a link that'll say recipe, and if you click on that, it'll take you over to the printable recipe. Now, to my whole wheat flour, my 2 cups of whole wheat flour, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1 teaspoon of ground ginger. Now, these are sort of traditional for making molasses cookies. Now, I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of ground allspice. Now, you do not need to add this if you don't want. I like the taste that the allspice adds to the molasses cookies, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in. You're also going to need 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And all I've got here is a fine ground sea salt, but use whatever salt you have. Next, you're going to need 1 stick of butter, and 1 stick of butter is 1/2 cup of butter. Now, if you want to keep these dairy-free, you can certainly substitute the butter for coconut oil. Coconut oil actually works very well in this recipe, and you'd want to use 1/2 cup of coconut oil. Now let's talk about the options for sweetening these cookies. Now, I'm going to use honey, because many of you have told me that you've had trouble finding sucanat, which is the dried sugarcane juice. It stands for sugarcane natural, sucanat. You've had trouble finding that at your grocery store, and I understand completely. My grocery store does carry it, but they sell out very quickly, so it's often not on the shelf. And so you've asked, what are some other options? Now, if you're at the very beginning of your journey, moving from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and all maybe you have in your pantry might be a light brown sugar or a dark brown sugar, you can definitely use that in this recipe. Or if you have sucanat, you can definitely use that. But if you use any of those dry sugars, you're going to want to use 1 cup. And I'll have this all spelled out in the written recipe. But if you can use honey, if you've got honey, and honey is usually easy to find, and you want a nice pourable honey, all you're going to need is 3/4 cup. Now, in terms of other dry sweeteners, in addition to if you're using the light brown sugar or the dark brown sugar, or if you've moved a little closer to your traditional foods kitchen and you do have sucanat, you can also use other dried sugars, and you'd use the 1 cup like maple sugar or coconut sugar or date sugar. All of those work very well in this recipe. Next, you're going to need 2 eggs, and we're going to beat these before we add them in, but you will need 2 eggs, and then you're going to need 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and any vanilla extract you have is fine. This is a homemade version, but if you have the store-bought, that's fine too. But if you want to learn how to make homemade extract, I'll be sure to link to the video where I show you how to do that in the description below. And then the star of the show, the molasses. You're going to need 1/4 cup of molasses. And this recipe is very flexible. If you have just the regular unsulfured molasses, which is what I'm using here, that's fine. And if you have the blackstrap molasses, you can use that as well. That has a little bit of a stronger flavor. So if you're, maybe at the beginning of your traditional foods journey, and you're introducing molasses to yourself, your own palate, or your family, or your friends, just starting with the plain unsulfured molasses works very well here. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is, I've got a little mesh strainer here. I find this works very well just in the event any of the spices or the baking soda or the salt, if anything has clumps. This is a good way to just kind of sift everything into your bowl. And I'm just going to go ahead and add in the baking soda, and I'm going to go ahead and add in the salt and all of the spices. Then I'm just going to shake this all out into my bowl, and if towards the end there are any lumps, I'll just smooth them out, and then we'll proceed on to the next step. Now we're going to go ahead and put our dry ingredients aside, and we're going to move on to creaming the butter. And we're going to cream the butter with the honey and with the molasses until it's nice and light and fluffy. And this works best if your butter is soft at room temperature and nice and soft. Now, you can do this by hand if you want, or you can use a handheld electric mixer, which is what I'm going to do. Or if you have one of those stand mixers, you can certainly do that as well. But I like to just sort of reserve that when I have a big job, because I find it a little more challenging to clean. But if you are using the one of those stand mixers, you'll just use your paddle attachment for this. Now, if you're using brown sugar or sucanat or one of the other dry sugars, you would add that at this time and just in place of the honey. Now, using the electric handheld mixer, this is going to take about 2 to 3 minutes to do, and it'd be about the same using the paddle attachment on your stand mixer. And if you're doing it by hand, it's just going to take a little bit longer, but you can do it with a wooden spoon, and you'll get a little workout. Well, that took about 3 minutes, and everything is nice and light and creamy. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in my first egg, and we'll go and beat that until it's fully incorporated. And now we'll go and add in our second egg, and we'll beat that again, and beat it well into this batter. And with each addition of each egg, I'm beating it for about 30 seconds. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add in that teaspoon of vanilla. And this, sort of like the allspice, is a little bit optional, but I really like to add vanilla almost to any cookies that I make. So I'm going to go ahead now and just beat in this vanilla. Now at this point, what we're going to do is start adding in our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. And this we just do by hand. I mean, you can do this with your mixer, but be careful, you don't want to overmix. So I really like to just switch at this point to my spatula and just start incorporating the flour mixture into the butter and egg and molasses honey mixture. Now I'm going to go ahead and just add in the last of my flour and incorporate that into our batter. This smells, I have to tell you, this smells so wonderful. It's all those aromas that you associate with the fall. So these are a perfect dessert for Thanksgiving or Christmas, you know, to have on your dessert table, or just to enjoy with a cup of tea. I was telling my husband I can't wait till these are ready. Because I'm looking forward to enjoying one with a cup of tea. This is just, to me, like the perfect fall afternoon treat. Now you're done mixing. Once you don't see any more white streaks of flour, you've incorporated all of the flour, and you have this wonderful, richly colored batter. You're done, and we're ready for the next step. Now all I'm going to do is clean off my spatula, because this is a very wet, sticky dough. And we're going to actually have to chill this for a bit before we can turn it into cookies. And I have to tell you that these molasses cookies were actually a viewer request. I have a very sweet friend, a very lovely viewer, and his name is Gary. And he said, "Mary, can you make molasses cookies? Because I would like to make molasses cookies for my father." And that just really touched my heart. And let me say, hello, Gary. I hope you're doing well. And I hope you and your dad will enjoy these cookies. Now what we're going to do is cover our bowl with some plastic wrap, and we're going to put this in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. We need this to firm up so that we can form it into little cookie balls basically to put on our baking sheet. But you can also let this chill overnight. But at least 2 hours, you might need a little longer. You'll know because you want it to be firm enough that you can handle it. Well, I actually wound up leaving this in my refrigerator overnight, so it's chilled beautifully. The batter is nice and firm, and it's going to be much easier to work with now. Now, what you want to do is get a teaspoon and scoop out about a teaspoon's worth of the dough, and then you're going to take it off the teaspoon, and you're going to roll it around in your hands to the point where you get a nice ball that's about, you're looking for a ball that's about 1 inch in size. And just keep rolling it around in your hands till it gets nice and smooth. And once it's nice and smooth and you've got a nice round ball, we're ready to move on to the next step. Now at this point you have a couple of options. What I like to do is to roll the little ball of cookie dough in turbinado sugar. And turbinado sugar is a very coarse ground form of sugar that's in the brown sugar family. And I'll show you a close-up picture so you can see exactly what it looks like. Something similar to turbinado might be labeled demerara, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. That's also a very coarse ground, a somewhat, in terms of, it's on the continuum of unrefined sugars. It's not as unrefined as, say, a sucanat, which is the dried sugarcane juice, but it's less refined than white sugar, and it gives these cookies a really nice crunch that are often associated with molasses cookies. They're soft and chewy, and then they have this nice little crunch of the coarse sugar. Traditional ones may be just rolled in a coarse white sugar or even just a regular white sugar, but I really like to use the turbinado, and this is pretty easy to find at most grocery stores. Now what I'm going to do is take the little ball that I rolled of the dough, and I'm just going to plop it down here into the turbinado sugar and roll it all around to get it completely covered. And once it's completely covered with the sugar, we're going to go ahead and put it on our baking sheet. Then we'll move on and get ready to do our next one. Now I've rolled my second ball of dough in the turbinado sugar, and I'm going to place this on my baking sheet, and this is a parchment lined baking sheet. It just keeps things neater and easier for cleanup. But if you don't have parchment paper, you'll just want to grease your baking sheet. But then when you get ready to put your next ball of dough down, you're going to want to place that about 2 inches away from your original dough ball. And while you're going through this process, you want to make sure that you go ahead and preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you get a total of 12 balls of the cookie dough on your baking sheet, spaced about 2 inches apart, you want to go ahead and get a glass, and you want to flatten down each ball till it's maybe about 1/4 of an inch flat or so. And if you find that as you do this, it's sticking a little bit to your glass, you can just put a little water on your glass and that'll solve the problem. Once you get all your cookie dough balls flattened, we're going to go ahead now and put these into our preheated oven, and we're going to bake them for between 8 to 10 minutes. Everybody's oven is slightly different, but you'll know that they're done when they start to crack on top. Well, I checked on these at 8 minutes and they looked perfect. They had started to crack on top, as you can see in all of them. I'll overlay a close-up picture so that you can see this nice and close up, so you'll know exactly what you're looking for. Now, at this stage, when you check on them at 8 minutes and they've already started to crack and you take them out, they're going to create a nice, soft and chewy molasses cookie. If you like something that has a little bit more crispness to them, then you'll want to let them go for the 9 or 10 minutes. But watch them carefully, because you probably want to check them at 9 minutes, because cookies cook very fast and they can also burn very quickly. So you want to be careful with that. But at 8 minutes, these had cracked on top. They look beautiful, so I took them out. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give them a minute or two to cool, just to kind of settle a little bit. on the baking sheet, and then I'm going to get my spatula and we'll transfer some to the cooling rack, and we want to let them cool completely. Well, these have cooled a bit on the cooling rack, and so they're still a little warm, but I figure we got to take a taste. Well, let me break one open and we'll see. Oh, see, it's got some nice ply to it. This is definitely a wonderful, chewy and moist cookie. And the aroma, oh, it's heavenly. This is, you certainly can make this any time of year, but it really has that holiday time aroma. I think it's going to be delicious, so let's give it a taste. Oh, that's so good. You get all of the flavors coming through, all of the spices, and that little bit of crunch of the turbinado sugar or any other sugar that you want to put on the outside. Really gives it a nice crunch on the outside. Oh, it's just delightful. I really hope you'll give these a try. Now, if you would like more whole grain baked goods, be sure to click on this video over here, where I've got a whole grain recipe for cowboy cookies, and I've got an einkorn cake and all kinds of wonderful things. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.